Welcome to number 7. We are talking about gas ships, liquefied gas ships to be particular, and what we're going to get into as well, why these ships are different, what's common. Well, it's pretty easy. The bow is the same, the stern the same, the bridge, the wheelhouse, a lot of that stuff is the same. There's just some little stuff that we got to talk about, make to mention, and this is chapter 23 in the book. But before we get to that, I want to go over something else with you. And let's see if you can get here. We'll slide the book out of the way and we'll just have this right here. I hope you're looking at this on a big enough screen so that you can read that. And it says, do you have email? Well, that's a question for you. Do you and are you able to get your MMA email? There's some critical things that are coming up. Some of those things are that you are going to be asked to register for classes, and that information is coming to you via the Maine Maritime Academy email. The reason I'm concerned is that two of you, and I'm glad that you reached out to me. I can make things happen. I can call the IT department. There's not a person in that IT department that I'm not on a first name basis. And you tell me that you got a problem, I can immediately communicate with IT, and I can have them call you. And we just did one last week, last week, and I think we can do the same thing this morning. I did it for another student. So if you're having any problem with connectivity, it's probably that it's rejecting your password. Who knows what happened? But let me know, because I can jump in there and help to rectify it. Point number 2, it says, how's this going for you? And let me put a question mark on there. And the reason I'm asking this question, because I suspected it, and I'm getting to reports, and it's I don't know, but I don't think these are about the class and what I'm doing here. But what we're hearing as the teachers, we're hearing that some of the classes that you're doing online are maybe a little bit unorganized, and that it's kind of like a lost treasure hunt that the students are having to go through to figure out what they're supposed to do next. So, I hope that I'm not doing that. I'm trying to think logically here, but I need some feedback. So, I'm a very needy person. No, I'm kidding. I'm just average with that kind of stuff. But I do need your input here. Tell me if we need to get more organized or less organized, or I'm doing too much, or whatever it is. But you've got to communicate with me. And just say, hey, look, say Captain Teal, it's good. Don't change a thing, or go for it. I can take it. Right down here on the bottom, it says YouTube, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Canvas. That's what's happening. That's the way I'm doing the class. Although not everybody's looking at them, I can't help that. YouTube and Canvas, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm going to hold to that. Now, I also sent you last week, I posted kind of a revised syllabus. It's posted in files. It's under the tab that says online material. It's in there. Take a look at that. It lists week by week. It tells you what the quiz is going to be, and so on and so forth. It's not real complicated. I'm not trying to do too much stuff here. All right, let's get going with today's lecture. But first, before we get going with today's lecture, look, I got something for you. Do you know what that is? That is your favorite thing. Yes, it is a peppermint candy. Look at it. Normally I would be passing these out in class over and over again. You can't have this one. It's the only remaining candy ever. I'm going to play a little game with it though. I'm going to hide that candy. I'm going to hide it under a glass here. Let's see if you can. We're going to do that. We're going to do so. There it is. See, and wait a minute, this isn't going to work. You can see it's a clear glass. So I'm going to do the game here. You'll never be able to follow which one it's under. I'm pretty tricky. So which one is under? You said this one? You're right. See, I'm kidding. I actually had 3 of these. Oh, hey, we got to have a little bit of fun sometimes. And that was as much fun as I could muster. What do I got here? This is the book. This is the textbook. And this is the book that we're into. And this is chapter 23, where we are at. It says liquefied gas carriers. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 pages, 11 and a half pages, and half of those pages are diagrams. That's what I expect you to have read. And we're going to talk about liquefied gas carriers. We're going to talk about the rules and regulations, some of those things. The first thing I want you to remember is I want you to remember these 2 words, membrane and spherical. Membrane and spherical. Write that down. Really, I'm not kidding. Write it down right now in your notes. Get your notebooks open. This is just like class. I'm drinking my cup of coffee too. You can hear me slurping, just like class. So write that down, membrane and spherical. Let's go back to this picture here. This is a spherical gas ship. It's carrying LNG. Now, by the time we get through this lecture, you'll know what this ship is carrying and what that means. But you can see those spherical tanks, 1, 2, 3. We'll look at these a little bit more. There is something different, and it is called a membrane tank. Let me jump up here. This is a membrane tank, a little bit smaller, but notice this one is, you see what it says here? LPG. So we're going to kind of have to sort that out. And let's get going on this. So ship structure online, number 7, liquefied carriers. Liquefied gas carriers. We looked at this one. We've already seen that. Let's go back to this one. We've already seen this, and now let's go right to here. So we have 2 types of product. Well, you know, there's going to be some other ones, but we got 2 types of products. LPG, which is liquefied petroleum gas, and something called LNG, which is liquefied natural gas. Well, these are what we're dealing with. There's different ways of carrying these gases. LPG and LNG. So make sure you know for the test. I'm going to ask you what LPG stands for, and you should be able to spell it properly. Liquefied petroleum gas. And you should be able to spell properly when I ask you what LNG stands for, liquefied natural gas. Now, LPG, when it's carried on a tanker, LPG is carried only, and I've used the word solely, under pressure at ambient temperature. There's actually 3 ways this can be done. This is the first one. Solely under pressure at ambient, that's just, normal temperature. It's not heated up, it's not cooled, it's just, the temperature of the environment, of the atmosphere. This is the most common way that LPG is carried on ships. There's another one, next bullet down, refrigerated below their boiling point or its boiling point so that they come to a liquid form. Now think about that. Refrigerated below their boiling point so that they exist, the gas, the product, exists in a liquid form. So basically cooling, but we can call it refrigerated. The third one is a combination of both pressurization and refrigeration. Let's think a little bit about LPG. Where do we know where do we know that we're familiar with LPG? Well, let's see. I've got here at the house, I've got a big tank out there sitting on the outside, and it says Dead River Company on it, and that has propane. Now the P doesn't stand for propane. That's kind of the short word, but LPG is liquefied petroleum gas, and that has been another name for that is propane. Anybody know who Hank Hill is? He sells propane and propane accessories, right? Some of you know that. I hope you're smiling. Well, that propane tank that sits out in my yard, which I run my stove off of, and the gas stove, and I've got propane heat here in the house, that comes delivered in a truck. The truck pulls up, connects a hose, and it goes into the tank in a liquid form. It comes to the house in a gas form. There is something called a regulator. Now, you're pretty familiar with this probably because I bet most of you, if not all of you, have dealt sometime with a gas grill, a propane gas grill. Summertime, we're doing a barbecue, we're using a gas grill, and you got that little white tank. You hook it up to the gas grill, and if you pick that tank up, it's heavy, it's made out of steel, there's a valve on it, and you open that valve up, and the product inside it. By the way, inside that tank, it's under pressure and it's liquid. If you shook that can, when you check to see if there's anything in it, you shake it, you can feel that there's a liquid in it, but it's held in the liquid state solely under pressure. Now, it's at ambient temperature. It just sits out there in the yard. So that's another example of propane or LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. Another one, some of you have camping lanterns, which are Coleman style camping lanterns. And you get those little mini green bottles. They're about 8 or 10 inches high. Oh, they're probably about 5 inches in diameter, and they connect up to the little cook stove that you take camping. And it's called Coleman fuel. But if you really think about it, what it is propane. That's the same thing. It's in that little green tank. You can buy those anywhere. They're disposable. When they're done, you can have a lamp, you can have a little cook stove, anything like that. LPG. Now, the other one, liquefied natural gas, the only way it's carried, the only way it's put on ships, and this little ship down here on the bottom, is only as refrigerated. That product is not, with LNG, liquefied natural gas, it is not carried at all under pressure. Let's look at a couple of pictures here. Well, here's a ship which is a LNG ship. It happens to be spherical tanks. All right, we get it. The liquid is in here. It's got 4 tanks. It's got a very pronounced view. When you see this thing coming at you, when you see this ship coming at you, you know it is an LNG ship. Only an LNG ship, and this is very, very common. It's sort of a cutaway view here, which is nice, and what you're seeing down here is probably ballast water. It is not part of the cargo. That looks like it's ballast water down here, and this is called a spherical tank. Now here's an LNG ship, big LNG ship. It's not spherical tanks, they're called membrane tanks. I asked you to remember those 2 words, spherical and membrane. Spherical and membrane. And by the way, here is a LNG ship at the terminal, at the dock. It's a membrane ship. Looks like a tanker, doesn't it? It looks very much like a tanker. This extra gear here on deck is part of the system, part of the cargo system. But this is an LNG ship tied up at the dock. Now, the IMO has some involvement about this, and if you were to look in the textbook, you would probably read this chapter. I'm going to take a quick look. I'm not going to ask you to watch me flip through the book, but on page 280, it says the IMO International Gas Carrier Code. And it's a paragraph or two which talks about how the IMO gets involved here. I'm not even sure that if you know what IMO stands for. It is the International Maritime Organization. Now they're a body, an international body that suggests guidelines to various maritime countries. As Americans, our regulatory body for the merchant marine is the United States Coast Guard. We only answer to them. The IMO gives guidelines to the Coast Guard. It is an international body. Actually, the IMO is set in Europe. And everybody meets at the IMO and discusses whatever the topic is, and one of the topics was gas carriers. The IMO doesn't have IMO police, they don't have IMO rules, but they do have guidelines. Now, in the book, what you're going to see, it's called the IMO International Gas Carrier Code. It doesn't become the law of your country until your country accepts that and puts it into law. It's a suggestion, it's an idea of the way it should be. Other countries may take that on as well. Here's another example of it. The STCW, Standards for Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping. It's got nothing to do with gas ships, but the IMO is the parent body which oversees, and by agreement, all those different people from all those different countries. In other words, people come from the United States as representatives. There's people from the maritime schools and people from the Coast Guard. They talk, they go to the IMO, particularly with the STCW, and they help make it. They help put these things, but only when it gets put into the law of the land here in the United States does it become, a requirement for us. It's just the way the world works. Well, let's look what this says. The International Maritime Organization has specific guidelines for addressing, let's look at this carefully, and this becomes a question, by the way, the carriage, cargo operations, and the construction of gas ships. I want to highlight that, the carriage, the cargo operations, and the construction of gas ships. Now, when I say something 3 times, I think you figured this out. Carriage, cargo operations, and construction of gas ships. I think you know what's going to happen to that. To that phrase, it's going to become a question. So we have, in particular, the methods of limiting damage to the cargo tanks in case or the event of collisions and grounding. Well, you probably all heard the horror stories about how dangerous these things are, and yeah, gas ships are particularly dangerous. But that has been mitigated. Some of us use that word, mitigated. In other words, lessened by the way the ship has been built. There is extra stuff that we can take into account. Ship survival in the event of collision and grounding. So it's keeping the cargo tanks intact. It's keeping the ship afloat. Special arrangements for safety on board. I'll give you just one example. There are special devices which are basically sniffing the void spaces to make sure that they are good to detect any leakage of that LNG gas. You've all heard about explosions. There was one here in Maine just this last year where LNG or LPG, I can't remember which one it was, built up inside a house or a building. And there was a loss of life involved in that. So, it can produce a very explosive atmosphere. So there's special detection on those ships. Rules for cargo handling and activity, or cab cargo handling activity and procedures. Very, very, very precise and crafted ways of doing it. Standards for how it's going to be done. The ship does it, the shoreside people do it. Everybody follows the same procedure. It's very, very tightly crafted. To work on an LNG ship, you have to have an additional certification. Rules for the materials used in the construction of gas ships. Well, and we've already talked about the rules for shipbuilding or for classification. This just takes it to a higher level. And then the last one here, rules for environmental protection. If we were in class now, I would say to you, I'd look around the room and I'd find the person who wasn't really paying attention, and I'd challenge them with a question. I'd say, what kind of ship is this? Propane or LNG? Well, of course, that's my trick question. It says LNG ship on the side, so you know. And some ships do carry this with, it actually says LNG ship on the side. Here's one of the diagrams out of the book. Diagram 2301. I'm flipping my book open to get to the same spot. Diagram 2301. And what we're looking at here is, let's see, we're talking about the very first one says semi-pressurized, fully refrigerated LPG carrier, liquefied petroleum gas. Okay, so this can be, all right, this is the stuff that's outside my house, the stuff that's in the, your container. These tanks here are semi-pressurized and they are fully refrigerated to keep that cargo in liquid form. Let's look at this next one down here that says fully refrigerated LPG carrier. That, and there's a little cross-sectional view here. Fully refrigerated LPG carrier. Liquefied petroleum gas, fully refrigerated. And then the last one says fully pressurized. And this is kind of unique. Those look like, the tanks outside, every house in Maine that you see, those twin propane tanks that people have. They look like a propane tank. Yeah, they're bigger. They're pretty solid, but they just seem to be all stacked up there. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's 2 rows of them. So, fully pressurized. What kind of ship is this? Oh, so there's no questions about what that is now, right? You can see what that is. It is a LNG ship because it says so. Now, let's talk about how they are similar and how they're different. They're similar to other types of tankers. The accommodation in the engine room is located aft. They look like a tanker. As a matter of fact, let's see, the cargo has a low specific gravity, and accordingly these ships float high as compared to other normal tankers of a similar size. If we go back and look at this diagram here, or look at this picture, you can see that ship is floating very, very high. Likely that ship is in a loaded condition. It's not empty, it's full, but because of the specific gravity of the cargo, that ship floats higher with more freeboard in the water. The ballast needs to be carried in independent tanks, and this word here, there's this abbreviation, SBT. I might ask you what SBT stands for in the discussion that's going to go along with this, as I do on every recording. SBT stands for Segregated Ballast Tanks. SBT stands for Segregated Ballast Tanks, and I'm going to write that down. That's going to be one of today's questions that's going to go along with the video. I'm writing that down. If cargo is carried in a refrigerated manner, it is important that the cargo is never allowed to touch the steel hull, the ship's steel hull. Well, now wait a minute. Why would the cargo ever touch? Well, that would be like a breach of the tank. That very, very, very cold cargo, if it came in contact, remember it's refrigerated to, and you can look that number up. I think I have it written down here, or maybe we're coming up against it, and we can give it to you. I think the book has it in centigrade, and I think we'll talk about it in a minute. We'll get to that. We'll talk about it in Fahrenheit. But it's cold enough that would cause the steel to become brittle. If it were to contact the steel of the ship, it would cause it to become brittle and likely to fail. Fore and aft construction of the gas ships is similar to other tank ships. The fore end construction, the aft end construction, very, very similar. The actual construction of the cargo area, the next bullet, the actual construction of the cargo area could be either transversely or longitudinally framed, and most likely it would be transversely framed. Extra scantlings will be present around the cargo tanks themselves. Well, that would make sense. They have to be protected, they have to be supported, they have to follow the rules, the guidelines to protect that space, so we're going to see extra scantlings. If there are void spaces around the tanks, they need to be monitored for any leakage, and I have already talked about that. Now here's an interesting one. Boil off refrigerated LNG from the cargo tank is sometimes used to fuel the ship. Now boil off, we think about boiling water. Don't think about something which is hot. Remember, this is refrigerated, and as it just warms up a little bit, there's a little bit of space. I'll show you a nice diagram. That vapor, I know we talked about vapors last week, that fuel, now basically natural gas, just like you might have piped underground to your home in some city, that is used to help fuel the ship. I think we've already talked about the next bullet. The classic spherical tank shape we associated with gas ships is going to be an LNG carrier, and I make the last bullet about these things called a membrane ship. So here's somewhere, we don't know where it is. It might be up in Norway. A lot of gas comes up out of Norway, and it is at a loading terminal. I want to go back to this particular diagram out of the book, because here's the schematic of the ship. This is diagram, let's see, 23.3. 23.3, and it is something called a Kavner-Moss spherical tank. And so here's the cutaway view, and we see here's the water ballast. Here is the drip tray for small leak detection. Notice that it's protected by from that part of the steel that would be the water tank. This could be water. This could be ballast here as well. Vertical tubular support, piping, and access. Look at this diagram here. Cold condition, warm condition. So as you remember, when you're carrying the cargo, this tank has to be able to contract when it's cold, it's going to contract like anything else. And when it gets warm, when it's empty and it would heat up, it would start to become larger, noticeably so. So there has to be a special construction. And part of that special construction is right here with this special perimeter ring around, which is the 9% nickel steel equatorial ring, which helps to allow for that dramatic expansion and contraction. Just as a little story on the side, when if a gas ship is empty, it was taken out of service, it goes into shipyard, something like that. Before it can be put back into service with these spherical tanks, they have to carefully introduce small amounts of refrigerated, cooled LNG to the ship to start to shrink that tank. They can't just start loading it all at once. They have to put it in there, spray it around, and very over a number of days, an amount of time, they could decrease, and they could basically pre-chill that tank so to avoid any stress on it. We're gonna try to zero in on this and make sure I get that in a good location. And there, looks like we got it now. Yeah, we can pretty much see all of that. Okay, so I like this because, let's see, it's kind of a little bit of a cartoonish view, but that's okay. We can kind of see what's there. So here we got the tanks, and you notice that there's a pipe goes across the top of the tanks. And look what's happening here. Follow my cursor. This is the boil off that comes down to a compressor, and is going to use, this is where the boil off is collected above. The vapor is collected and comes down into the engine room. Now, this makes it look so simple. Obviously, that has to be done. And you can see this is a diesel engine, which is that internal combustion engine. But that could be used on a boiler, a steam boiler, and a steam turbine ship as well. All right. So that's kind of nicely explains that. Let's see if I've missed anything. I'm just going to take a little bit of a pause. I'll be back in just a little bit. Just wanted to finish up with something, and I didn't have it in my notes, and I wanted to check myself. LNG is predominantly made up of methane. It's colorless, clear fluid with no odor. And any odor that you smell or that you associate with anything like propane or LNG, that's actually added, that kind of that rotten egg smell. Otherwise, it would be odorless, and that's why they do it, so that you can tell if you do have a leak. It's carried at atmospheric pressure at a temperature of 160 degrees Celsius. Now, minus 160. My question to you is going to be, what is that in Fahrenheit? What temperature, if you convert that, and I'll ask that question in the discussion as well, and that comes out by my calculation of minus 250 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. So I think I've covered all the things that I want to cover. You've got all the details, and we're off and running, and there you go, end of the class, and I'll have something new for you on Wednesday. So please make a comment about the video or anything that you'd like to. In particular, don't forget, I'm asking you how things are going and how are you getting email. Are you able to use your main maritime system? And really, that gets to the question, are you ready to register for classes next year, for next semester? All right, see you later. Bye-bye.